Zeke, with his tail wagging, scrambled out to the protruding edge of a rock in the middle of the crescent pool. He barked several times, announcing Devon's arrival. Rich and Carl did not turn to acknowledge. Rich bent over to pick up a gold pan, then stepped towards Carl. Rich was dripping wet, while Carl looked completely dry. "Get off my back," Carl said as he swatted the gold pan out of Rich's hand. It skipped across the rocks, landing in the sand near the water's edge. He turned abruptly, walking downriver along the rocks, not bothering to pick up the pan. Zeke trotted after him. Devon waded past the running dredge and climbed out of the water onto the sandy area of the camp. What was that all about? "I've been dredging for a couple of hours. I poked my head out to see if Carl was clearing the sluice box and saw him sitting in camp smoking your stash," Rich said. "What, my hash?" Devon asked. "He sure the hell didn't bring any of his own." "No big deal, I brought it to share." "He was supposed to be panning. That's why we're out here, freezing our asses off in this blast furnace," Rich said, wading out to turn the dredge off. Rich had spent his entire life in the San Francisco Bay Area, known for its cool fog. The Sierra foothills were like another planet to him. The heat built up through the day and lasted late into the night. The temperature just before the sun rose was as hot in the foothills as it would be on the hottest days in the Bay Area. From morning on, it just got hotter. The water in the river flowed quickly from the high mountain snowmelt, rising in temperature only a few degrees by the time it passed by the camp. As Rich stepped out of the river, Devon approached him, saying quietly, "Carter told me to leave him down here." "Who, Carl?" "Yeah. He told me that Carl had ripped you guys off a couple of weeks ago." "He didn't steal anything from me," Rich responded. "I was real surprised when Carter told me that he wanted to bring Carl after that happened." "Odd," Devon said. "He said that we needed Carl's dog for protection from the wild animals." "Funny. All we've seen is trout," said Devon. "Has he put hits on other people?" Rich cut in to say, "Are you sure that he wanted you to kill Carl?" "He told me that he'd have an envelope full of cash when he picks us up if Carl is not with us." "No, I'm not aware of any other hits that Carter has ordered. It seems out of character, but you never know. I mean, I've never seen him so pissed off as when he got ripped off." Just then, Carl walked up to see what they were talking about. "We need to get upriver," Devon said as he inspected his pouch. "What'd you find?" asked Carl. "I think I found the mother lode." "In the river, or is it a vein in the rock?" "No, it's a deep hole next to a waterfall. It's got to be full of gold," Devon said as he walked over and pulled on the securing line of the dredge, moving it in toward shore. "Are we going to move the whole camp or just the dredge?" "We need the dredge and the pans. There may be a good campsite up there. For now, we should just move what we need. If we find a place to sleep up there, we can send Carl back for the camp supplies," Devon said. "Yeah, let's put that lazy bastard to work," said Rich. Devon pulled the dredge ashore. He brushed the larger rocks out of the sluice box and snapped the riffles out so he could empty the contents into a pan that was sitting at the river's edge. "You want to pan this out while I heat up some lunch?" Devon said, then turned and walked over to the food pack. He rummaged through and pulled out 2 cans of chili. Rich filled the pan with water and began to wash the material around in a circular motion. He looked up from the pan. "So you don't mind that Carl was smoking all your hash?" "He didn't smoke all of it. There's still a good chunk left. Besides, it's easy to come by." "What do you mean? Does someone in Ned's neighborhood import it from the Middle East?" "No, I made that stuff." "No way. That's the best hash I ever had. Carter said it's the best he ever had, too. How the hell would you even know how to make hash?" "I didn't. It was an accident. When I moved into Ned's house, there were several grocery bags full of marijuana leaves in the corner of the bedroom that he didn't want. He said he kept it around to smoke with his girlfriends. He said I could smoke as much as I wanted, but it gave me a headache. One night I ground some up and put it into a pipe. It still gave me a headache, but after the first hit, it tasted kind of like hash." "So where'd the leaves come from?" Rich asked. "Ned isn't a grower, but he has fingers in just about all the crops in that area. Anyway, they go to his house to trim and bag the buds. The grocery bags of marijuana leaves were the scrap from several trimming parties." "So you just ground up leaves and got hash?" "I ground up a whole grocery bag of them one night into a fine powder, then put them into a cookie sheet and baked it for about 30 minutes. That's the hash I brought to your house a couple weeks ago." "Marijuana brownies without the brownies," Rich said with a smile on his face. "Exactly. That's where I got the idea. Right on." Devin loaded the pipe, took a hit, then passed it to Rich. They smoked the pipe, then ate the chili. It was a perfect combination. They leaned back on their elbows in the soft sand with looks of dumb contentment, staring at the air in front of them, nodding about nothing. Soon, they were both fast asleep. Devin's mind transported him to a cool place. He dreamed he was laying on a soft bed with crisp, cool sheets. A breeze rolled over his bare skin. He turned to see Dara walking slowly over to the bed. Her soft brown hair and laced white nightgown flowed in the breeze as she knelt onto the bed. She bent down and began to passionately kiss Devin. Devin moaned lightly as he turned to pull her to him. Devin heard voices in the distance that grew louder. "You shouldn't sleep with your mouth open," Carl said. Devin opened his eyes to see Zeke's face eye to eye. Zeke was licking Devin's mouth. Devin said as he recoiled, wiping the dog's saliva from his mouth. He sat up with a scowl on his face. "Get that damn dog away from me." Rich woke up and looked around to see what was happening. Carl had a dive mask on and was pushing the dredge out into the water. Devin stood up and said, "Hang on, Carl. We're going to move the dredge upstream." "Hey, I'm ready to dredge. I'm sick and tired of panning." Carl pointed to the two backpacks bulging with tailings. "Okay, you can dredge as soon as we get upstream." Rich and Carl loaded an empty backpack with dinner rations, 2 folding military shovels, 2 gold pans, and 1 50-foot rope. Devin rolled the hoses on top of the dredge, then used 2 bungee cords to secure them. He made loops in the securing line to act as a carrying litter for the dredge to transport over the rock. He tied 2 ropes with enough slack to pull the dredge through the pools. The troop set out upriver. Zeke ran out ahead, jumping from rock to rock. The air temperature continued to rise through the afternoon. Sweat dripped from the men as they made their way upstream. From time to time, Devin and Rich gladly waded through the hip-deep pools of icy water to cool off. Carl stayed out of the water as he was carrying the food and supplies. When they could, Rich and Devin walked on opposite sides of the river, each pulling a rope secured to the dredge. The floating dredge bobbed back and forth in the flat pools as each moved forward. They climbed over each small waterfall, dragging the dredge over the smooth-faced rocks. Rich and Carl were not nearly impressed with the black pool as Devin had been. They were seeing it from above the water and could not appreciate the dazzling spectacle of the golden squares against the shiny black bottom. When they reached the 6-foot-high falls at the downstream end of the stretch of river that the deep pool was in, all 3 struggled with the dredge to get it over the step. From that point on, they walked across large rocks to the deep pool. "Carl, see if you can find a place to tie off the dredge above the cliff face," Devin said. Carl climbed up the rock that surrounded the deep pool, looking for a suitable place to tie off. Rich jumped in the pool with his rope and dog paddled across to find a second tie-off for the dredge. Devin stood in the foaming water at the deep pool's edge, steadying the dredge. Zeke jumped back and forth between the last 2 large rocks the others had crossed adjacent to the deep pool. Zeke wasn't ready to swim and was unable to pick a suitable landing spot on the rock wall that Carl was climbing. Carl poked his head over the top of the rock wall, then turned and yelled down to Devin. "The first tree is a couple 100 feet up. I don't see anywhere to tie the rope off." Rich pulled himself onto a ledge on the waterfall side of the deep pool with the rope end clenched between his teeth. He scanned the rock face. Not finding a reasonable way to get to the top, he tied the rope into several knots and stuffed the knot into a small crevasse in the folding rock face. He jammed the knotted rope in with his foot. "Give a tug on the rope, see if it holds," Rich said to Devin. Devin pulled on the ropes. It held fast. "Carl, see if there's a crevasse in the rock that you can stuff a knot into," Devin said. "Rich, can you put a rock on top of the knot so it doesn't slip out?" Rich worked his way across the ledge to a point near the bottom of the falls, then stepped into the water to get a rock. Carl climbed back down the rock face, tied a series of knots, then stuffed them into a crease in the rock near the water's edge. Devin made the ropes taut on the dredge once he got into position. He set the dredge so that the sluice box extended into the whitewater just beyond the deep pool. The suction hose dangled down along the rounded walls of the deep pool's downstream side. Devin tossed Carl a rock about the size of a loaf of bread. Carl placed it on the knots in the crevasse. Rich explored the rock wall for a way to get over the falls. He made several attempts and backed down each time, not finding a way he could successfully negotiate. Carl climbed along the rock wall to a point that he could leap across to the rock that Zeke was on. Zeke jumped to another rock. As Carl leaped, Zeke jumped back to the same rock. Carl nearly lost his balance as their feet struggled for the same real estate. Devin stepped over and grabbed his arm. "Let's not get the pack wet," Devin said. Carl walked back across several large rocks to a point where a shelf on shore was large enough to put the pack down without worrying of it slipping back into the water. He pulled the pans, shovel, and dive equipment out and started back to the dredge. Devin pulled on the starter cord and the dredge rumbled and spit. He adjusted the choke and pulled the cord again. It started up, spewing gray smoke into Devin's face. Devin coughed and adjusted the choke and throttle. Clear water began to cascade across the sluice box. From where Devin stood, he could not tell how far down in the deep pool the bright yellow suction hose extended. It was 15 feet long. It didn't seem to reach the bottom. Carl waded in next to the dredge as he slipped on his dive mask. He then poked his head in the water to get a look at the deep pool. He pulled his head out and turned to Devin. "I don't think the hose goes to the bottom," Carl said. "Yeah, it's pretty deep. How am I going to do this?" "There are a lot of folds in the rock along the sides that may hold gold. Try to suck that out first. I'll try to figure out a way to get to the bottom," Devin said. Carl's dive mask was completely white with fog on the inside. He turned to dive into the pool, and Devin grabbed his arm. "Hang on, Carl. Rinse your mask." Carl stared back at Devin through the foggy lens of the dive mask with his head cocked to one side. Devin reached for the mask. Carl's hand snapped up around the sides of the mask. "You said I could dredge," Carl said. "You can dredge, Carl. Just take your mask off and rinse it out so you can see." Carl backed up a step and said, "I can see fine." He jumped in and swam down to the hose. "He's an idiot," Rich said from across the pool. Zeke, standing on a rock near the dredge, barked several times in Rich's direction. "You're an idiot too," Rich said. "Leave the dog alone," Devin said. "Rich, come over here and help me rig something to get to the bottom." Rich and Devin went downstream to where Carl had set the pack. Most of the flat areas along the river's edge contained gatherings of debris that had come downriver at some time or another. Piles of stripped tree branches were littered with leaves and covered in sand in those areas. They sorted through the several broken pieces of tree branches until they found one about 10 feet long. Rich broke off a couple of small branches that protruded from the 10-foot-long branch to make a pole out of it. Devin used duct tape to tie one of the folding military shovels to the end of the pole. He set the shovel head to a 90-degree angle from the pole, then tightened the securing nut on the shovel. Then Devin handed the pole to Rich, and he took it to the dredge. Rich put on a dive mask and jumped into the deep pool with the pole in hand. He dove down to a point where he could extend the pole to the bottom and scoop a shovel full of material. Carl turned when he saw something moving behind him. He saw that it was Rich. Carl turned to swim to the surface. As he kicked his way up, his foot hit Rich in the lower leg. Rich turned and swam to the surface also. Carl and Rich poked their heads out of the water with their masks on. Carl's mask was still fogged up. "I thought I'm supposed to be dredging," Carl whined. "What are you kicking me for?" Rich said. "Carl, how can you see with your mask all fogged up?" Devin asked. Rich reached out and slapped Carl across the back of his head in an upward glancing blow. "What the hell is the matter with you?" Rich said in a mocking tone as he treaded water. "You know what? That's it," Carl said, then swam to the side and pulled himself out of the water. Carl stormed off downriver. Zeke followed. "I was just messing with him," Rich said to Devin. "Screw him. The sluice box is completely clean. He didn't dredge anything." "Damn, he must be high," Rich said. "Oh, well. Hey, Rich, when you scoop the material, start with the waterfall side of the pile down there. Just scoop the material that's against the bedrock. That's where the gold will be. I'll tape a rock to the end of the suction hose so it hangs down as far as it can. Then you just have to raise the shovel to the suction hose and the dredge will pick up the material from the shovel." Devin pulled up the suction hose and taped a rock to it about a foot from the end. He let the hose fall back into the deep pool and waded over to pick up a gold pan. Rich dove down and scooped material from the bottom, then pulled the pole up in a hand-over-hand manner until the shovel head was against the dredge's suction hose. The material sucked into the hose and Rich repeated the action over and over again. The water pouring over the sluice box of the dredge began to darken as the material mixed with water. Devin brushed the walnut-sized rocks from the sluice box. The tailing from the sluice box emptied into the white water of the river next to the deep pool. Devin began to see color. Flecks of gold peeked through the washing material in the riffles of the sluice box. Then he saw a nugget the size of a pea roll along, then a nugget the size of a cashew. This was it, the mother lode. They had just started dredging, and in almost every scoop, gold poured into the dredge's sluice box. Devin turned the dredge's engine off so he could empty the sluice box into his gold pan and start panning the material. Rich swam to the top to see why the dredge had stopped. Devin picked a cashew-sized nugget out of the sluice box and held it out to Rich. "Damn," Rich said. "This is it, man. This is the glory hole. The mother lode. Hell yeah." Devin snapped the riffles back into the dredge and started it up again. Rich's eyes sparkled and his teeth shone below his mask. He could not keep from smiling. He dove back down to get started again. His heart throbbed. His mind raced. He could buy a new car. He could move out of Carter's house. He would be able to ask Robin out. He was going to be rich. Devin rolled the water around the gold pan, swishing the rocky material out with each swirl. Even before all the rocks were out of the pan, gold began to show. Several pieces the size of sunflower seeds rolled around the pan. A couple nuggets were the size of peas. As he got down to the black sand, he could see fine gold in abundance. Devin thought to himself that if this kept up throughout the day, he would have enough gold to buy a house in a good neighborhood. He thought for a moment to buy Ned's house and kick him out on the street. Then Devin would be alone with Dara. He could take care of Dara the way she should be taken care of. Devin didn't care about being rich. He just wanted to have self-respect. He just wanted to feel as though he was a provider. He didn't want to feel worthless anymore. He wouldn't be a freeloader anymore. Nanette had mocked him for not making enough money. He would have money now. She would be sorry she had left him when she heard about this. It didn't matter. He would be with Dara. The sluice box continued to fill with material heavy with gold. Rich dove repeatedly, scooping up more and more material. Devin panned out the sluice box material over and over again. As his pan got down to fine black sand, nuggets, and fine gold, he poured its contents into the other pan that sat on the rock next to him. After about 2 hours, the pan that held the gold was nearly 2 inches deep of black sand and gold. Devin walked back to the pack to find something to put the booty into. Carl came around the corner of a large rock. His eyes were red and heavy. He had been getting high again. Devin looked in the pack for the hash and could not find it. It didn't matter. Gold was a far better high, and they had plenty now. Rick shot out of the water screaming, "Holy shit! Check the dredge! I just saw a nugget the size of a golf ball!" Devin splashed into the water, running to the dredge. Carl ran to the water and waded in. Rich swam to the dredge. Devin reached it first. The nugget poured out of the nozzle and over the sluice box, landing with an audible thud on one of the riffles. It was 1.5 inches across, nearly spherical, with smooth pockmarks. Devin reached for it. Rich and Carl looked on. It seemed like everything was in slow motion. All senses were at critical. Devin's finger touched the nugget as it rolled over. Just then, a yellow rope shot past Devin's elbow. What was that? He thought. The dredge moved. The nugget slipped away. Devin groaned. Another yellow rope shot past Devin's head, sailing over the dredge, raining water droplets along its trajectory. Devin stretched to grab the nugget with his whole body. The dredge moved away. He crashed into the water. Frantically, he scrambled after it. The dredge turned and picked up speed downstream. "Zeke!" Rich shouted. "The damn dog kicked the rope loose!" Zeke scrambled along the ledge that had held the knotted rope. Devin did not turn to see the dog. He watched the dredge pitch over, spilling the huge nugget into the white water. Devin dove out after the dredge. The dredge spun around, then disappeared into the white foaming water. Devin surfaced in time to see the yellow ropes snake under the white water and vanish. It was gone. For a moment, it seemed that everything went silent. Devin could no longer hear the water crashing around him. What the hell just happened? It's gone, he thought. The sound began to return. Devin could hear Rich screaming at the dog. Carl was screaming back at Rich. The roar of the white water got louder. Devin turned to see Zeke galloping along the rocks in an attempt to get away from Rich's screams. Zeke turned in front of Carl and headed back to shore, landing in the middle of the pan with the black sand and gold. The pan flipped over and over in the air. Its content ejected over the white water speckled the dancing crests. "No!" Devin yelled. Zeke bounded over to the shore and ran downstream. Devin and Rich ran after him. Carl stood in the water watching. Devin picked up the backpack, pulling the Tech-9 out. Carl ran toward him. Pop, 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 pop. Devin rattled off 6 shots, well above, but in Zeke's direction. Bullets threw off chips of rock along the bank of the river. Carl tackled Devin. Rich ran to pull Carl off of Devin. "What the hell are you doing?" Carl demanded. Devin said nothing as he breathed harshly, staring downriver. He wiped the water from his brow, stood up, and walked back into the water, dropping the gun on the sand. Rich and Carl sat in the sand, looking out over the water, not talking. Devin pulled a mask on and began to search underwater for any nugget that could be seen. The water was full of bubbles, and he could find nothing. After several minutes, he came back to shore and dropped his mask in the sand. "Now what?" Rich asked. "The dredge is gone. The pans are gone. We're done," Devin said. He picked up the gun and slung it over his neck, then started walking downriver. Rich and Carl followed. No one talked the rest of the way back to camp. No sign of the dredge was seen. It must have been sucked into an underground aquifer. The heat burned on. Devin had gotten another nickname, Lucky. The two with him knew him as Killer. They'd never heard the other nickname. A girl he knew in the Bay Area called him Lucky. She said that he always got out of the worst messes without a scratch on him because he was lucky. He wondered if she would think he was lucky now. How could she? He had planned for weeks. He had talked Carter into financing the trip. He had convinced Rich and Carl to risk their lives with him. All for what? Nothing. Nothing now. It was all lost. Devin marched on downstream. He should have made sure that the dredge was better secured. He couldn't bring himself to look back at Rich and Carl. He wasn't angry with them. He wasn't mad at the dog either. He felt that he had let everyone down. He knew that Ned didn't think that he'd get any gold. Devin wanted to prove that he could. He knew that Dara didn't care if he got gold or not, but it mattered to Devin. With gold, he would know that he could take care of himself and someone else. That someone could have been Dara. He knew it down deep. This trip would not prove it to anyone, especially not to himself. Devin was the first to arrive back in camp. Zeke was rolled up on the sand. He kept his head down and sheepishly wagged his tail as Devin walked up to him. Devin bent over and pat him on the head. "I know it wasn't your fault. You're just a dumb dog having fun out in the middle of nowhere." Rich and Carl walked up and set down the pack and shovel, then sat down in the sand. Devin put the gun on the rock ledge and sat down next to Rich. "Well, at least we're going home tomorrow," Devin said. "How long do you think it'll take to get back up the hill?" Rich asked. "I guess it depends on how heavy those backpacks are," Devin said, pointing to the packs full of tailings. "Good thing we left those here," Carl said. "Yeah, we got to take something out of here," Rich said. Zeke walked slowly next to each of them with his head down, wagging his tail. He looked up at them with his head tilted down. He seemed to be asking for forgiveness. Devin and Rich pet him as he walked by. Carl grabbed him, gave him a bear hug, wrestling him to the ground. Devin stood up and walked over to the packs. He picked them both up one at a time. "These packs weigh more than 50 pounds each. I don't know if we're going to be able to carry them back uphill." Devin set the packs down, then turned to Rich. "I don't think you realize how hard that's going to be. It's more than 2,000 feet up to the top. Most of the way is like climbing a sand dune. You have to take several steps to get up one step. You keep sliding back down. I've never seen anyone carry more than 5 pounds out here, and you'll need that much water in your canteens to get out. I honestly don't think we'll be able to carry the tailings back up the hill." "I'm not leaving this down here. Can we walk down river?" Rich asked. Devin walked to the supply pack and pulled the topographical map out. Tunnel Hill Quadrangle was the map title in the upper right-hand corner. Devin unfolded to see how far the Rubicon River was downstream. It was less than 3 miles on the map. The river squiggled this way and that, eventually dumping into the Rubicon. The road they had come out on 2 days earlier ran along the Rubicon before it ran in a serpentine fashion up Ralston Ridge. The map showed a dirt road running up from just beyond the intersection of the Rubicon River and the Long Canyon. The dirt road connected to the paved road that ran along Ralston Ridge. Yeah, looks like we can do it. I never went out that way before, but I always wanted to try it. If you guys want to, let's do it, Devin said. Hell yes, Carl said. I'm game, Rich said. Then it's settled. We'll go out via the river. We should leave first thing in the morning. We still have to meet Carter before dark, and I don't know how long it will take to get out that way. After finishing cold sea rations around the unlit fire pit, they each dusted themselves off and settled into their sleeping bags, falling fast asleep.